The jungle erupted in gunfire. Private John McKenna's hands trembled as he slammed the 8th round through his M1 Garand, dropping another Japanese soldier charging toward the captured machine gun position. 7 enemies down, 1 bullet left. His finger squeezed the trigger one final time, and then it happened. The sound every American soldier feared in the heat of combat. Ping! The metallic cry of the empty en-bloc clip ejecting into the air cut through the chaos like a dinner bell for death. McKenna's rifle was empty, and somewhere in the darkness of that remote island outpost on Luzon, enemy soldiers had just heard his vulnerability announced to the world. In that frozen moment, with his hands fumbling for a fresh clip, McKenna represented every rifleman's nightmare, a warrior rendered defenseless by the very mechanism that made his weapon revolutionary. But this story isn't just about one soldier's desperate fight for survival. It's about a sound, a simple 8-ounce piece of spring steel that became one of World War II's most debated tactical liabilities. A sound that turned the greatest rifle of its generation into a potential death sentence. A sound that, depending on who you asked, was either an overblown myth or the last thing hundreds of American boys heard before enemy fire tore through their positions. The question that haunted every soldier carrying an M1 Garand was simple. Did the enemy know? Were they listening? And when that clip sang its metallic song, were you already in their sights? In 1936, the United States Army made a decision that would reshape modern warfare. They adopted a semi-automatic rifle as standard issue for every infantryman, a revolutionary choice when the rest of the world still relied on bolt-action weapons that required manual cycling between shots. The architect of this transformation was a soft-spoken, self-taught, Canadian-born inventor named John Cantius Garand, who had spent 15 years perfecting his design at Springfield Armory in Massachusetts. Garand's rifle was a marvel of engineering. It used the propellant gases from fired bullets to automatically cycle the action, ejecting spent casings and chambering fresh rounds without any manual intervention, while a German soldier with his Mauser K98K or a Japanese soldier with his Arisaka Type 99 could fire perhaps 15 aimed shots per minute. An American with an M1 Garand could unleash 50 to 60 rounds in the same time frame. General George S. Patton would later call it the greatest battle implement ever devised, and for good reason. It gave American infantry a staggering firepower advantage that changed the mathematics of combat. The rifle fed from an 8-round en-bloc clip, a U-shaped piece of spring steel that held 30.06 cartridges in a staggered formation. Loading was simple. Pull back the bolt, insert the clip from the top, and release. The entire clip sat inside the rifle's internal magazine, flush with the weapon's profile. No protruding magazines, no fumbling with separate components under fire. 8 shots, then the clip automatically ejected when the last round was fired. The bolt locked open, and the rifle was ready for immediate reload. It seemed perfect, almost too perfect. By 1942, as American forces deployed to both the European and Pacific theaters, the M1 Garand had become the standard arm of over 1 million soldiers and Marines. In basic training camps across the United States, young men, many who had never fired a weapon before Pearl Harbor, learned to field strip, clean, load, and fire their Garands until the motions became muscle memory. They learned the weight of it, 9.5 pounds unloaded. They learned its quirks, the way it kicked against your shoulder, the careful technique required to avoid crushing your thumb when loading. What they didn't learn in training, what couldn't be taught in the relative safety of stateside rifle ranges, was the psychological weight that iconic ping would carry once bullets started flying both ways. The problem, a fatal, Tell the Pacific Theater revealed the M1's potential vulnerability in the most brutal classroom imaginable. Japanese forces had perfected infiltration tactics, silent patient approaches through dense jungle, followed by sudden, overwhelming banzai charges designed to break enemy lines through sheer ferocity. These weren't random attacks. Japanese soldiers were trained observers, taught to identify weaknesses, to listen for opportunities, to strike when Americans were most vulnerable. And vulnerability in combat has a sound. The M1 Garand's en-bloc clip, when ejected after the 8th round, produced a distinctive metallic ping as the spring steel struck against the rifle's receiver and resonated before falling to the ground. At close range, the distances where Pacific Island combat often occurred, This sound was audible even amid the chaos of battle. While the noise of an M1 firing registered at 168 decibels at 1 meter, creating temporary deafness in anyone nearby, there were brief lulls in firefights, moments when a soldier might pause to assess, to reposition, to catch his breath, moments when sounds carried. Reports began filtering back through the ranks, whispered in foxholes and repeated in after-action debriefs. German veterans interviewed decades later confirmed what many suspected. They listened for the ping. A soldier who heard that metallic ejection knew two critical facts. The American in that direction was empty, and he needed at least 2 to 3 seconds to reload. In urban combat during the Battle of Manila, in the bocage hedgerows of Normandy, in the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, 2 seconds was an eternity. The paranoia spread like dysentery through American lines. Soldiers began reporting that enemy forces would hold fire, waiting to hear clips eject before launching assaults. Whether this was tactical doctrine or battlefield coincidence didn't matter. The fear was real, and fear in combat is as dangerous as enemy fire. Men began second-guessing their reloads, hoarding their final rounds, firing 7 shots instead of 8 to avoid the telltale sound. This defeated the entire purpose of the M1's semi-automatic advantage and reduced its effectiveness to that of a bolt-action rifle with a slightly larger magazine. The psychological impact was compounded by another cruel reality: the chaos of ammunition logistics. In the Philippines, supply officers unfamiliar with the M1 system sometimes shipped 5-round stripper clips designed for the old M1903 Springfield rifles instead of 8-round Garand clips. Soldiers found themselves scrounging through mud and brush after firefights, collecting ejected clips like precious currency, sometimes reloading them by hand in foxholes under fire, a maddening, fumbling process that required both hands and invited mistakes. The rifle that was supposed to give Americans an overwhelming advantage had become, in the minds of many, a weapon that announced your death warrant the moment you emptied it. Could the weapon that won the war also be killing the men who carried it? The physical mark, Garand thumb. But the ping wasn't the only way the M1 Garand left its mark on the men who carried it. There was another signature, more intimate and infinitely more painful. A battlefield injury so common it earned its own name: Garand thumb. The M1's loading mechanism was spring-loaded and powerful. When you pulled back the operating rod to open the bolt, you created tension that wanted nothing more than to snap forward and chamber around. The proper technique, drilled into every recruit, was to hold the operating rod back with the heel of your palm, while inserting the clip with your other hand, then ride the bolt forward with control. But in combat, with adrenaline screaming through your veins, with enemy fire cracking overhead, with your hands slick with sweat or blood or rain, soldiers made mistakes. If you failed to keep proper pressure on that operating rod, if your hand position slipped even slightly, the bolt would snap forward with the full force of its powerful spring. And if your thumb was still inside the receiver when it happened, the bolt face would catch it with bone-crushing pressure. Steel meeting flesh and nail with roughly 40 pounds of force concentrated on a single digit. The pain was described as excruciating, a white-hot lance that shot up your arm and made your vision blur. Your thumbnail would immediately turn purple-black, blood pooling beneath the nail bed. In the worst cases, the nail would eventually fall off weeks later. But in combat, there was no time for sympathy or medical attention. You had to keep loading, keep firing, keep fighting, now with a mangled thumb that screamed with every trigger pull. Medics could identify Garand thumb victims instantly by the characteristic bruising under the thumbnail. It became a dark badge of honor, proof that you'd been in the shit, that you'd fired your weapon in anger, that you'd lived through the chaos long enough to make a mistake. In field hospitals, doctors saw hundreds of these injuries. Young men with blackened thumbnails, sheepish grins, and stories about how it happened during a reload under fire, rather than admitting it occurred during a moment of distraction or poor technique. Private Jackson in Saving Private Ryan would later immortalize this injury on screen, his bruised thumbnail a small but authentic detail that veterans recognized immediately. It was the price of carrying the Garand, as common as blisters and as revealing as a soldier's 1,000-yard stare. The M1 Garand demanded respect. It demanded technique, and if you failed to give it either, it would punish you with a pain you'd remember for weeks. assuming you lived long enough to remember anything at all. The creative solution. The deception. American soldiers were nothing if not adaptable. If the ping was potentially lethal, then perhaps it could be weaponized, turned from a liability into a tactical advantage through deception. The solution was brilliant in its simplicity. Fake the sound. Veterans from both the European and Pacific theaters recounted the same tactic, passed soldier to soldier like contraband cigarettes. When pinned down by enemy fire, when you knew hostile forces were close enough to hear, when the tactical situation demanded deception, you'd reach into your pocket, pull out an empty en-bloc clip you'd saved from a previous reload, and strike it against your helmet or the stock of your rifle or throw it against a rock. Ping. The sound was nearly identical to a genuine ejection, and if enemy soldiers were indeed listening for reloading opportunities, they would hear that metallic cry and believe an American position was vulnerable. They might expose themselves. They might make their move. They might step into the sights of a fully loaded M1 Garand operated by a soldier who hadn't fired a single round. It was psychological warfare in its purest form, using the enemy's tactics against them, exploiting their training and expectations, creating false opportunities that led to real casualties. The tactics spread through unofficial channels, never appearing in field manuals or official doctrine, but understood by combat veterans as a potentially life-saving trick. The practice also served a psychological purpose for American soldiers themselves. It transformed them from potential victims of the ping into masters of it. Instead of fearing the sound their rifles made, they controlled it, manipulated it, used it as a weapon as surely as the 30-06 rounds in their clips. This sense of agency, however small, mattered immensely in an environment where so much was beyond a soldier's control. But did it actually work? Did enemy soldiers genuinely rush American positions after hearing that distinctive metallic ejection? Or was this battlefield legend more myth than tactical reality? The truth behind the ping. The reality, as with most combat situations, was more complex than the legend suggested. When U.S. Army Chief Warrant Officer Charles D. Petrie traveled to Bastogne, Belgium in 2004, he sought out German World War II veterans who had fought against American forces. He asked them directly about the M1 Garand's distinctive ping. Their responses were illuminating. Yes, they knew the sound. Yes, they understood what it meant. But no, it wasn't the tactical advantage Allied fears had imagined. The fundamental problem was battlefield acoustics. Combat is not a quiet affair. The crack of rifle fire, the thunder of artillery, the screams of wounded men, the roar of engines, the crash of explosions, all of this creates an overwhelming sonic environment where distinguishing a single metallic ping at any meaningful distance is nearly impossible. The M1 Garand firing produced 168 decibels of noise. Submachine guns like the German MP40 and British Sten were equally loud or louder. The temporary deafness that followed firing or being near weapons fire made hearing subtle sounds impossible for crucial seconds. Moreover, combat formations meant that rarely did every American soldier empty his rifle simultaneously. If one man's Garand pinged, 3 others near him still had rounds loaded. Any enemy soldier attempting to exploit that single reload would face immediate fire from adjacent positions. The tactic only made sense if an entire unit ran dry at once, a scenario that competent infantry tactics specifically prevented. The reload speed also mattered critically. A trained soldier could reload an M1 Garand in 2 to 3 seconds, less time than it would take an enemy soldier to process the sound, identify its location, rise from cover, and rush the position. The window of vulnerability was razor thin, far too narrow for effective exploitation in most tactical situations. Yet the fear persisted. Some American veterans remained convinced throughout their lives that German soldiers responded to the ejection sound, that comrades died because of it. This belief, whether objectively accurate or not, shaped behavior and created genuine tactical concerns. The psychological impact of the ping was real, even if the tactical impact was largely mythological. What cannot be disputed is this: the M1 Garand's semi-automatic capability provided such an overwhelming firepower advantage that any potential liability from the ping sound was vastly outweighed by the rifle's benefits. Japanese forces attempting banzai charges found that tactics which worked against Chinese troops with bolt-action Mausers failed catastrophically against Americans with Garands at Guadalcanal and throughout the Pacific. 8 rapid shots could break a charge that 5 slow bolt-action rounds could not. The ping became a symbol, a focal point for combat anxiety, a tangible thing to fear in an environment filled with intangible threats, a mechanical quirk that represented the randomness of who lived and who died in war. The Crucible, McKenna's fight. Private John McKenna had no time to contemplate the mythology or reality of the M1 ping debate when Japanese soldiers overran his position on Luzon in the early morning darkness. He had seconds to react, seconds to grab his Garand, seconds to decide between fighting and dying. He chose to fight. The Japanese had already captured the submachine gun position, killing the 2 Americans manning it in the initial surprise assault. Now they were turning that weapon on McKenna's comrades, and if someone didn't retake it immediately, the entire outpost would fall. McKenna, barely awake moments before, found himself sprinting toward heavily armed enemy soldiers with only his M1 Garand and whatever ammunition he'd loaded before the attack began. 2 Japanese soldiers with Arisaka bolt-action rifles saw him coming and raced to intercept. It became a deadly foot race, 3 men running toward the same position, knowing only one would arrive with the advantage. McKenna's semi-automatic Garand gave him a critical edge, while the Japanese soldiers would need to stop, aim, fire, and manually cycle their bolt-action rifles between shots. McKenna could fire on the move, delivering multiple rapid rounds without breaking stride. He fired. 1 enemy soldier dropped, fired again. The second fell. But more were coming, wave after wave of Japanese troops attempting to consolidate their capture of the machine gun position. McKenna reached the gun emplacement and took cover, his Garand becoming the only thing standing between the enemy and total overrun of the American position. Bang, 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 bang. 8 shots, 1 clip, 1 enemy down, maybe 2 if his aim was true in the darkness and chaos. Ping, the empty clip ejected, spinning through the air, catching what little light existed. For a fraction of a second, McKenna was vulnerable. His hands moved with trained efficiency, pulling a fresh clip from his ammunition belt, jamming it into the rifle's receiver, releasing the bolt. 2 seconds, 3 at most. Then he was firing again, another enemy soldier falling, another threat eliminated. Bang, 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 ping, reload, fire, reload, fire. The rhythm became mechanical. Survival reduced to its most basic components. Identify threat, aim, shoot, reload. McKenna's world contracted to the front sight of his Garand, to the targets moving in the darkness, to the dwindling ammunition in his belt, to the hope that reinforcements would arrive before his luck or bullets ran out. He held that position through wave after wave of assaults. When American reinforcements finally fought their way to his location, they found McKenna surrounded by spent en-bloc clips and 38 dead Japanese soldiers. He had fired over 300 rounds, reloaded his Garand dozens of times, heard that potentially fatal ping echo across the battlefield again and again, and survived every single vulnerable moment it represented. Private John R. McKenna received the Medal of Honor for his actions that night. The citation mentioned his courage, his marksmanship, his determination. It didn't mention the sound of empty clips ejecting, the psychological weight of each reload, the fear that must have accompanied every ping. But McKenna knew. Every soldier who carried the Garand knew. The ping hadn't killed him, but it could have. In 1,000 other firefights, on 1,000 other dark nights, maybe it had killed others, or maybe it hadn't. Maybe the enemy never heard it, never cared, never attempted to exploit it. The uncertainty was part of the burden every rifleman carried along with the 9.5 pounds of walnut and steel. The legacy, sound of victory. The M1 Garand served as America's standard infantry rifle through World War II and the Korean War, remaining in service with the Army Reserve, Army National Guard, and Navy into the early 1970s. South Korean forces carried Garands in Vietnam until the late 1960s. The rifle's durability meant it appeared in conflicts decades after its official retirement, found in the hands of insurgents in Iraq and Afghanistan, in the 21st century. Weapons that began their service lives before the soldiers carrying them were even born. General Patton's assessment proved correct. It was arguably the greatest battle implement ever devised, at least for its era. The semi-automatic advantage gave American infantry a firepower edge that saved countless lives and won countless engagements. The very characteristic that caused so much psychological anguish, the automatic ejection of the clip after 8 rounds, was part of the brilliant mechanical design that made rapid reloading possible. John Garand never received royalties for his invention. He was a salaried employee of Springfield Armory, and his design became government property upon adoption. While his rifle became one of the most iconic weapons in American military history, Garand himself remained relatively unknown outside firearms circles. He continued designing weapons until his retirement in 1953, including a bullpup prototype in the late 1940s that was ultimately abandoned. The debate about the Ping's lethality continues among historians, veterans, and enthusiasts to this day. Some veterans insist it was a genuine threat. Others argue it was overblown paranoia. The truth likely exists somewhere between these extremes, real enough to cause legitimate concern in close-quarters combat, but not significant enough to outweigh the rifle's overwhelming advantages. What remains undisputed is the cultural impact of that sound. The M1 Garand's ping became one of the most recognizable audio signatures of World War II, as iconic as air raid sirens or the particular note of a P-51 Mustang's engine. When President John F. Kennedy wanted a personal connection to military history, he acquired an M1 Garand through the Director of Civilian Marksmanship in 1959, a rifle that would later sell at auction for $149,500 in 2015. Today, M1 Garands remain popular among shooting enthusiasts and collectors, prized for their historical significance and mechanical elegance. At shooting ranges across America, that distinctive metallic ping still rings out, no longer a potential death sentence, but a reminder of the men who carried these rifles into some of history's most brutal battles. Men like Private John McKenna, men whose hands bore the purple-black evidence of Garand thumb, men who heard that sound hundreds of times and learned to reload so fast that vulnerability lasted only heartbeats. The M1 Garand won the war not despite the ping, but alongside it, a minor mechanical quirk that represented something far larger about the American experience in World War II. Innovation, firepower, the industrialization of warfare, and the young men who adapted, improvised, and overcame every obstacle, including the sounds made by their own weapons. The sound that defined a generation. The M1 Garand's legacy is complex, built not just from steel and wood, but from the experiences of millions of soldiers who trusted their lives to its mechanism. It was the rifle my father carried through Europe, the weapon that uncles cleaned in living rooms years after the war ended, the tool that shaped American military doctrine for decades. And yes, it made a sound, a distinctive metallic ping that might, or might not, have alerted enemy soldiers to moments of vulnerability. But it was also the sound of American industrial might, of John Garand's 15 years of patient engineering, of semi-automatic fire that gave riflemen advantages their grandfathers could never have imagined. Was the ping dangerous? Perhaps in specific tactical situations at close range. Was it the death sentence that paranoid soldiers feared? Almost certainly not, at least not to the extent battlefield legend suggested. Was it real enough to matter psychologically? Absolutely. The fear was genuine, the anxiety was real, and the creative solutions soldiers developed, from faking the sound to rapid reload techniques, demonstrated the adaptability that won the war as surely as any technological advantage. The M1 Garand deserved its reputation as the weapon that won World War II. The ping was simply part of the package, a reminder that even the greatest innovations carry quirks and complications, that warfare is as much psychological as physical, and that soldiers will always find things to worry about when the alternative is confronting the deeper, more existential fears that combat creates. 8 rounds, 1 ping. Millions of men who heard that sound and lived to tell about it. That's the real story of the M1 Garand. What do you think? Would you have trusted your life to a rifle that announced when you were empty? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story gave you a new perspective on the weapons that shaped history, Let us know what other World War II innovations you'd like us to explore. The battlefield is full of stories waiting to be told.